every human child and every human adult is actually a natural born learner. Curiosity is innate. And so we were just trying to ignite that. And we love the word empower. When we say empower learners, like we want kids to know that they own their learning and to see their actions now. It's direct tied to their future success. Hi, and welcome to the Kindled podcast, where we dig into the art and science behind kindling the motivation, curiosity, and mental well-being of the young humans in our lives.
Together, we'll discover practical tools and strategies you can use to help kids unlock their full potential and become the strongest version of their future selves. Welcome to the Kindled podcast. Today, it's Katie and me, and we have a deep dive for y'all. And so, Katie, what are we diving into today?
Today, we're going to talk about Prenda's learning model. We're going to talk about the underlying principles, the science behind it, the model of microschooling. That might be kind of a new concept to some people. So we're going to talk about microschools, why we are so passionate about microschools, and all of the principles that kind of like underlie why we are doing this. And we're going to dig into some details about what a Prenda microschool looks like. It's going to be great.
Okay, so what is Prenda's main purpose?
Oh, this is such a fun question because I just remember the meeting where we decided this. So Prenda's mission is to empower learners. And when we were first deciding this, we had this meeting. I think there were like 10 of us. And we had all of these like mission statement kind of like brainstorms, like ideas up on the board. And we knew it was something about learners. And Kelly Smith, our founder, was very passionate that he didn't want a mission statement that was like long, like and kind of like cliche, like platitudey. He just wanted like 2 words that said what we were doing, like super cut to the chase, which is so Kelly. And I'm always like trying to write these like long flowery paragraphs and stuff. He's like 2 words. I'm like, okay, 2 words. So we originally started, we had lots of words, like what did we want to do for learners was kind of the question on the table. And we ended on empower because I think a close second was like cultivate or nurture, or I think originally we had create learners. That's what it was. And, we had this amazing discussion about how like we weren't actually creating learners, how every human child and every human adult is actually a natural born learner. Curiosity is innate. And so we were just trying to ignite that. And we love the word empower. And Prenda, actually, the name Prenda kind of embodies that, because Prenda literally means gift in Portuguese. And then it also kind of sounds like aprender in Spanish, which means to learn. And then it's also a verb that means to light or like turn on or like to spark a fire. Like you say like prendo un fuego, like you're going to light a fire. And so that is really the main mission of Prenda and how we see ourselves positioned in the whole education landscape. And yeah, so we're here to empower learners. That's what we do. So also early on, we learned that the main way that we were going to empower learners is not like directly to teach them or to say things at them or to create a textbook or anything like that. We kind of drew this picture of the child at the center and then Prenda as kind of like a bigger circle around the child, but there's this kind of C-shaped, I don't know if you can like imagine this, kind of a C-shaped buffer between Prenda and the child, and that is the guide. And so what Prenda does is we empower adults, parents, teachers, homeschool moms, anyone who wants to help us on this journey of empowering learners. We empower them to start microschools, which then directly impacts the child. And we have little touch points with the child, like through our software and through the curriculum and things like that. But mainly we're designing a system that will help you or any adult who loves and cares about kids. If you're a crotchety old person that doesn't like kids, I'm sorry.
A crotchety old person.
Really, really though. There are some people who like just love kids and like have
kids.
this. Yeah, you have to like kids to do this. And like, if you don't like kids, please don't do this. And that sounds like mean and rude, but yeah. Okay. So,
because it's hard to empower a child if you don't like them.
oh, it's impossible because all they want to do is not be with you. And so like, if that is how they feel about school, like your relationship with them is how they feel about school, is how they feel about education and learning to some degree. Right. And so that's a big part of the work we do is helping adults become people who kids like, because our traditional kind of way we are with kids, it's pretty hard for a kid to like an adult when we're doing all of the things that, you know, standard parenting or standard educating teaches us to do, teaches us like how to treat a child, how to kind of frame your relationship with a child. Makes it really hard for that child to like find safety and rest in your relationship. And if they can't find safety and rest in your relationship, they're going to be in fight or flight. Their prefrontal cortex is going to be off and the learning centers of the brain will not be engaged. So it's kind of a self-defeating cycle if you're not going to be able to show up and like be like just to be able to infuse that learning environment with joy, honestly.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say that Prenda's mission seems simple: empower learners. There's a lot that goes into it because we have to empower adults who like children, who can empower learners. So what do you see? So we're empowering learners and these kids growing up in a totally different environment for education, and they're owning their education and they're learning what they're interested in and passionate about. How do you see that this is going to make a change in the world, like in a broader sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you look at the statistics on like adult happiness, you know, like we all, like all of us parents and educators for generations have said, like, what do we want for our kids? We want them to be, you know, happy. We want them to live like meaningful, fulfilled lives, of purpose. And then you look at all of the statistics about adult happiness and you see like really low mental health. There's only like 15% of the adult population who reports being like really engaged and like happy at work, like in what they're doing. The people that feel like very called to what they're working on. Most of us are just in this kind of pattern where we're waking up, going to work, doing things we kind of don't care about, like doing the bare minimum, coming home, watching Netflix and just like coasting, right? I wouldn't say there's a high percentage of people in the world who are waking up motivated, excited to like live their purposeful, meaningful life, right? And so we really want to increase that percentage. And if you look at what we've been doing and you look at the results, it's like, hey, well, what we're doing isn't engendering that result at all. But we keep doing what we're doing generation after generation, right? So Prenda is meant as kind of like a pattern interrupt to this whole idea of like what the goal of life is and like what meaning is and what purpose is. It's not just like a cute curriculum for kids. It's like, it's an entirely different perspective on how humans like exist in the world. And we see that like potential, that curiosity, that potential passion that either gets Prenda'd, like kindled or like ignited in childhood, or it gets suppressed, right? If you are sitting in a classroom and you're just like passively receiving and someone's like pouring knowledge into you, they're actually like, what do you do if you're trying to start a fire? You don't pour a bunch of water on it, right? Like that's the worst thing you can do is get all of the wood wet. And then you have to wait for it to dry before you can start to kindle it again. And I think that's so true of what we see of these kids. They're just like sopping wet with people trying to just like pour knowledge on them and expectations on them. And nobody has helped them find their unique drive or their intrinsic motivation and help like preserve and nurture and protect that. The kids that come into Prenda, especially from public school, a traditional classroom, but also from homeschools and private schools, they're telling us loud and clear that they're not jazzed about learning, right? We have the data to prove it. And essentially they're like wet wood, right? And they come into Prenda and then they do nothing for a while. Some of them take off right away and they're like, oh, you're giving me choices about this. I can learn about what I want to learn about. I can set my own goal. Some of them are like, I'd say like 70% of them like are able to get this pretty quickly. There's another 30% of them, I'd say, that are kind of like in that wet wood stage where it's just like, I just need to heal and I just need to like do nothing for a little bit. And it's terrifying as an adult because you're like, I put them in this new learning environment. I want to see them running. I want to see them like engaged. And there's kind of this like drying out phase that they have to go through before you can really kindle a love of learning and like an intrinsic motivation in them. But that's like a totally normal process. And we just help parents and guides like lean into that.
Yeah. That's such a great analogy. I have been doing this podcast with you for a year and a half, and I don't think I've heard you say that before. That is so great and gives you such a visual of what is happening and why so many kids just have no drive. I talk to a lot of parents, and especially for some reason of boys, and it's just they have no drive. They have no interest. They have no passions. And I think this is part of the problem. And to circle back, you talked about the frontal lobe going offline. You said it very quickly. And so if the frontal lobe is offline and the brain's not safe, then the brain cannot learn. And so I feel like this is what we're able to do is provide safety first. You know, the brain can be safe so it can actually learn. And it takes environment, it takes a caring adult. So all the things that Prenda is creating, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah. Can I share a quote here? So this is by L.R. Nost. She wrote The Gentle Parent. And this quote, I just found it the other day and I really loved it. She says, "It's not our job to toughen our children up to face a cruel and heartless world. It's our job to raise children who will make the world a little less cruel and heartless." And I just love that because sometimes when we come in and say safety first, it feels like we're like overprotecting kids and like coddling them and like making so they don't have to deal with hard things. And it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about with safety. We simply mean that the child feels safe enough to take a risk, to be wrong, to push themselves, right? Kids in a traditional classroom feel like their value is on the line, right? If they bring home a B- instead of an A+, or if they, there's some sort of comparison or competition at school and they're second place, they feel devalued. And that triggers their nervous system into thinking like, I need it. Sometimes it's good. Like a little bit of stress can like motivate you. That's good. But when that stress is chronic and when they can't escape that stress, there's no safe place for them to like rest, like, okay, they're in the classroom. It's like very competitive, but then they go home to rest. And it's like, nope, it's like that here. Like get your homework out. Like, I'm comparing you to your siblings and like, there is no rest for these kids. And you see it in the mental health statistics. Our kids are suffering anxiety, depression, suicide rates are increasing in our youth population. And the brain has to have a place of rest. And research shows really clearly that if the brain isn't at rest, it can't learn. So we're putting kids into this cycle where we want them to do stuff. And the way that we see kids do stuff is when we motivate them by fear, right? You're going to lose recess. You're going to look stupid in front of the class. Like we're using all these fear-based mechanisms to get them to do stuff. And we see like, oh, that's a really effective motivator, right? Like you make a kid afraid, like they sit in their seat, like it's very effective in the short term. And so, so then it's like, oh, that's the most effective way. Like, let's bust out the stickers, let's bust out the grades. Like, let's use all of these mechanisms to control these kids and push them. And I think it's done with good intent. We want kids to excel academically. We want them to be excellent. We want them to be strong and to be able to handle stressful situations. Like those are all good things. And I think the message of Prenda is you don't have to choose one or the other. It's not like I'm going to choose the mental health of my kids and like protect them and create this safe environment for them and never challenge them, or I'm going to like hand them over and they're going to compete and they're going to learn to like, bring home those A's and like win and all this stuff, but their mental health is going to suffer. This like right now in the world, it's kind of a dichotomy, right? Like you kind of have to pick one of these things. But Prenda is like a hypothesis that there is a middle way where you can have strong mental health, intrinsic motivation, love of learning, and academic excellence, and like to be able to help kids handle stress in a healthy way that doesn't actually negatively impact their brain development, which is what's happening right now.
Yes, absolutely. You said so many things So I started talking about the brain and I couldn't remember where I was going with that. And then I was like, oh, because adults are walking around in a chronic state of stress. And then you said the chronic state of stress right as I was writing that down. I was like, oh my gosh, we're totally on the same brain. Like we're jiving here. But that's the thing, like so many adults are walking around in this chronic state of stress and they don't even realize it or know. And so what we know about brain science is if there is this super high levels of stress, it affects everything. So what an opportunity we have right now to impact kids before they become adults that have a frontal lobe that has been offline for so long. They no longer have drive, motivation. Like you said, they're just showing up to work so that they can feed themselves and have a home but they're not living a purposeful life. And so what an opportunity we have to be able to really grab hold of these kids when their brains are so young and fresh and developing. And the brain still needs stress. I mean, Ned Johnson talks about this a lot, and a certain level amount of stress is great, but when it crosses over to chronic, guess what? There is no resilience. I bet all of us want to have kids who are happy, but also who are resilient and who can overcome challenges. I read one time in one of Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson's books, I can't remember which one, maybe the Yes Brain. And it was a really small section. It was so transformative for me to go, oh my gosh, this is why we can't just keep pushing these kids harder and harder and keep throwing more and more at them, is because if there's chronic levels of stress, resilience doesn't happen. Everything just shuts down and goes into a survival state. And so we want to, like you're saying, cultivate an environment that has just enough amount of stress, but so that resilience can still happen.
And that we do stress together, right? Like research shows that the most stressful thing about stress is like having to do something traumatic or go through something traumatic or something stressful by yourself, right?
By yourself.
So like we're going to put these kids in all sorts of situations in a Prenda Microschool where they are like very stressed, right? But we're going to do that in a way that they feel like they have a partner and have a teammate and have a culture, a community around them that's supporting them in that stress. Like I was just talking to my 11-year-old who's been in Prenda since I think this is his 6th year or something. Like he's a Prenda kid through and through. And I'm like, what are you stressed about? Like, what are you worried about? He's like, I don't know. I feel like my life is like good and happy. I'm like, what's the most stressful things? He's like, just getting those Conquer goals done. Like I'm worried. I'm like, it's totally on his mind all the time. He like knows where he is. Like he feels like this responsibility and there's no sticker, there's no grade, there's nothing hanging over his head in the short term to like make him stress about that. He just knows that he owns his learning and that his long-term life results rely on him, right? And so he feels, when you feel this responsibility, it changes how you think. It changes how your brain processes your life, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I didn't get my worksheet done, so my teacher's going to be mad. It's like, I'll do it so she's not mad at me. Like that's a very short-term fear-based cycle. Like when he doesn't do a Conquer goal, he's like, dang it. Like I've let myself down, like my future self would not be pleased with me. And like, I need to like double down and get this done. And it's not like we definitely have conversations that are like, hey, it seems like you have this thing, like how does me support, like, do you want support? What does my support look like for you? Like writing, for example, it's really tricky for them to like stay on top of their writing assignments in their Microschool. They do a pretty rigorous writing program. And my oldest has dysgraphia. So writing's tricky for him, right? So like there's already these naturally embedded stressors. Like we don't have to invent stress for kids. Like the world is already stressful. We don't have to make it more stressful. I feel like I just am remembering this moment where it's like, I don't know if this is going to like land or be relevant, but I remember when I was an aunt and I didn't have any kids of my own. And I was helping my little niece like walk, like she was like learning how to walk or something like that. And I was trying to help her and she fell down and she started crying. And I didn't have kids then. Like I didn't know that was like totally normal and like fine. She was actually totally fine. But my brother looked at me and he was like, thanks a lot, Katie. Or like said something mean to me about like endangering his child or something like that. And I just looked at him and said, I already feel bad. You don't have to help me feel bad. And like, it's like with kids, it's like they already feel stressed. They already want their lives to learn to work out. They already don't know what to do. Like it is already incredibly stressful for them to like grow up. Growing up is just stressful. Okay. We don't have to invent things to stress them out, like grades and assignments and homework. Like all of this stuff is kind of invented to put that pressure on them. Like if we just let the natural way of the world, and maybe in a past generation, it was a little easier to say that because life, especially like in America and like middle class America, is like for a lot of kids, like kind of easy, right? It's like if like the food is going to be there. I'm not saying for everyone, but for a lot of people in America, the norm is like kids are not necessarily, and I always hesitate to say this because I know there are so many kids who don't have this. And so that is like one of the natural stressors. Like they do see
but
like
even
kids
those really impoverished. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's not as much adversity for sure
these days than there was. Like my mom has done a lot of like family history research, and she's like told me stories about like our ancestors just like 100 years ago, like like my great grandma wanting, like her mom left and she had to do the laundry. She was 10, and like doing the laundry was like boiling a kettle of water, getting all of the family's clothes for like 8 kids and like putting it in boiling water and like mixing it around, like doing all of this super hard stuff. But when her mom came home, she had done the laundry, and her mom looked at her and said like, I can trust you to do the work of a woman. Like you are a contributing member of this like family economy and our survival. And she felt that as a 10-year-old. And it's like, we don't often feel that, like give our kids that much responsibility. So they never feel that accountable, so that they don't like their drive towards competency and like the ability to do the work of a man or a woman, like to contribute, isn't as acutely felt now as it was in past generations, right? Like 2 generations ago, we were sending 16-year-olds were lying about their age to go fight in World War II because they were so brave. And I can't even imagine. Like we were just reading Old Yeller. Have you read it? Have you read Old Yeller?
Yes.
Okay. So it's like they're on the plains, whatever. This 14-year-old boy is left to take care of his family as his dad goes on this cattle drive. And I'm like, Everett, my oldest, who's 11, I'm like, that's you in like 3 years. Do you think you could do any of this stuff? And it's just like, no, I couldn't do any of this stuff. But also our life doesn't call for those skills. Right. And so the skills that our life does call for, I do think he's like 3 years away from being able to like to be able to contribute meaningfully to the family or to his own like savings account or like to the world. Right. And so I think that with Prenda, it's just really important that we stay focused on like the real education, not the diploma, not the degree, not the paper that says you sat in class for long enough, but the real skills, the real character, the real who you are of a person. I think that is what when we say empower learners, like we want kids to know that they own their learning and to see their actions now. It's directly tied to their future success. We want them to feel that ownership, which is incredibly stressful. It's actually way easier to sit in a desk and have someone tell you what to do all day. It's different to feel like, oh shoot, I have to like craft my own path and I have to find mentors and I have to like really dig in here. It's a much greater cognitive load than that we're asking of these kids. And we start asking them these things when they're 5, right? So like, yes, we're creating safety. This is all a giant tangent around safety. Like, yes, we're creating safety, but like we are creating a deep competence and confidence in these kids that they can handle anything that shows up in their life. They can handle it like tactically, they can handle it emotionally, they can handle it socially, like all of these, like all the different ways that and like skills and like categories of development, like they're going to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to walk us through a day in the life of a Prenda student. Before we do that, you said something that I found very profound and I wanted to pull out is you said your son would go, oh, my future self would be disappointed with me. I don't think many kids are walking around thinking about their future self. So is this something that in the Prenda Microschool that we talk about? I mean, I guess I do know this, but can you walk us through what that future self and just giving kids that language and why you start the year off with that, and that be a big focus in a Prenda Microschool?
Yep, for sure. So a few different reasons. One, like if you're listening to this and you're hearing like, you know, my son saying that, whatever, you're probably thinking something like, oh, my son would never say that. Or like, yeah, like we're really far away from that. I'd say you're actually just right around the corner from that. It's closer than it feels, because this is a spark that is in every human heart. And so don't give up is my first sentence here. And so the importance of finding of this concept. So, okay. So the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain right behind your forehead here. We talk about it constantly on the Kindled podcast, but just to review, problem solving, emotional regulation, inhibition, and I think most importantly, the ability to predict the future, to say like, this thing I'm doing now is tied to this result. So I'm going to make this choice instead of this choice, right? That is a very prefrontal cortex skill. And that the prefrontal cortex, again, doesn't start developing until the age of 7, which we know. And it doesn't finish until the 20s. Usually people say 25, but we had that neuroscience scientist on a while ago that told us that was kind of a myth. That was just the oldest person in the study, right? So like, they don't even know, like, 25, like you're done cooking. Like they don't even know that. It's just kind of the thing that gets said. So it's a really long haul is what I'm saying. And so a lot of people, when I talk to them about like doing purpose work with a 5-year-old, they're like, well, they can't even understand that like their decisions now affect tomorrow. How can you even expect them to like hold this concept of a future self and work towards it, right? And to that, I say like a baby doesn't have any concept of like speech or walking or running or anything, right? Like all they've known is like you holding them, right? They don't know like, oh, someday I'm going to be a walker, right? Like they see our model of that, and they might, you know, they have the infrastructure in their bodies and like the brain infrastructure to like to become that, but they don't have a cognizant knowledge of that, right? They're not sitting there thinking about walking someday and like making sure that they're like playing with all of their fine motor skills just so that they can be good writers someday, right? But we know that all of those things add up and build. And what do? We model really great walking around, and we model talking, even though they can't talk and they can't walk. And so when we spend an education, a child's education, modeling to them, living a life of purpose, and when we spend that life talking to them about this idea of a future self, that while the prefrontal cortex, while they're still kind of limited by their prefrontal cortex development, it comes a whole heck of a lot quicker than if you suddenly start talking to them about purpose and vision for their lives when they turn 18. Right? Then we get kids who are totally like overwhelmed. They're like,
you're priming the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, these 18-year-olds that are graduating, they're like, I've never even really thought about what I want to do. Like I've just been jumping through other people's hoops so long, like anything that I want is kind of dead or like was never even alive. Maybe when I was little, but I was quickly schooled into realizing that all of my hopes and dreams or like passions were something to be tabled instead of something to be focused on and nurtured and cultivated. So that is why purpose is really important. Also, accountability. So we really want to change the relationship. So going back to the prefrontal cortex, kids look to adults in their life, especially parents and especially teachers. These are primary caregivers. These are adults that kids spend hours and hours with every day. And their brain looks to these adults for safety, right? And so as long as they're getting those safety cues, like the prefrontal cortex stays on, like we can learn, everyone's happy. But a lot of times in school, we create a very adversarial relationship between adults and kids. And we have this kind of kid culture that is very anti-adult culture. And when two cultures are at odds, things don't go the right direction, shall we say. So any sort of like learning's fun or learning's cool that like we as adults kind of like try to push on to the kid culture is immediately repelled. It's like, what do you think is cool? No, it's the opposite. Like not learning is cool. Like it's just, these cultures are just fighting and fighting and fighting. And when we can come in and reframe that and say, actually, I'm not here to push anything. I'm here to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. And we're looking at, what are we looking at? We're looking at your future self, and we're looking at the landscape for your life. And what do you see? And what do I see? That's so interesting to us, isn't it? What would you like this to look like? And how can I help you get there? And now I'm not pushing.
Yeah.
Now they're not pushing against me. I've partnered with them. And that is scary, because in order to do that, you have to let go of some control. You know, your quiet classroom with kids sitting in rows, that's adult culture pushed onto kid culture. And they're being compliant because they know that they are reliant on us for survival. And part of that is staying in our good graces, right? Because if like your ancestral brain knows that, like, if at any moment a lion shows up, who is the teacher going to protect? Probably the well-liked kid who's obedient and can sit still and not talk and gets good grades, right? Because that's the teacher. That's who the teacher likes. So your brain knows that there's safety. There's internal safety in being liked and appreciated and valued by adults. And we've created a world for kids where the currency of that liking is academic performance and good behavior. So if you can't show up as a kid who can sit still all day, or a kid who can get an A on the math test, our culture has set up that, like, you are at odds with the adults, and the thing that they want you to do before they will love and accept you is perform and behave. And if that's a hard thing for you because it's developmentally inappropriate for you to be able to sit for 7 hours, like, you're going to have this adversarial relationship, which is going to keep you in that constant state of fear and seeking approval, seeking acceptance, which might drive compliance. So adults that like compliance and like want those quiet classrooms, they're like, this is great. This is gold. How can I use this? Right. And we're actually like withholding our relationship to push behavior or academic excellence on kids, instead of like partnering and saying, like, what do you see? What do I see? And how can we do this together?
Okay. When someone thinks of school, because especially if you're in the US, school looks a certain way. And so micro school, you might be like, okay, small school, but there's still this vision or this thought process of what school looks like. Like you mentioned, desks and chairs and the teachers in charge. But then as I'm listening, it's very counter to all of that. So can you take us through, like, what does a Prenda micro school look like, and what does the day look like for a student versus a traditional environment?
Yeah. So when we say micro school, what we mean, and this word is thrown around, micro schools are hip and trendy now. When we started this in 2018, they were not. I was the weird mom at the park talking about this weird new thing, and I had to spend like an hour just explaining what it was. And now everyone's like, oh, cool, micro schools. Like, where can I find a micro school? Which I love. That's great. It's a big success for the movement. Yeah. Everyone knows what this is now. But it is defined differently. I think that you can find micro schools, or like schools or entities that are broadcasting themselves as micro schools that are really like small schools, like 100 kids, 70 kids, right? What we're talking about is a group of 5 to 10 kids. This is like in business, in the military, like this is the smallest unit that can be led by one person. Like in a business, you never want to have more than like 8 to 10 direct reports. Like once you get past 10 direct reports, you're like, all you're doing is managing. It just gets really stressful. And there's not enough relationship to go around, essentially. So we get, so 10 is like our ideal number. We have micro schools that have 12, that have 13 with the older kids. They do well. I've also talked to these guides and they're like, that is the limit. Like, and so it's like, you know, it differs.
Or there's also micro schools that have, there's micro schools that have multiple teachers or multiple micro schools like within a micro school network. So I think it's really just looking at how many adults per kid.
Totally. It's like a ratio thing for sure. But there's also kind of like I could put 60 kids in a room and I could put 6 adults in there and keep a 1 to 10 ratio. But the most important thing is that every child knows who their one person is. Right. They're building a relationship. It's not like adults are just mingling. And I think other micro schools really take that approach. And so I think it's really important that like there's a mama duck and she's got 10 ducks and those ducks know that she or he is there for them. She is their coach. She is their guide. She is there for them. She is the one investing a lot of time and energy into their relationship. She's the one that has the emotional energy as a micro school guide, maybe not as a teacher, because the like hats that we ask teachers to wear are just like astronomically outrageous. So how can we help kids? Like people will come in and they'll be like, I can handle more than 10 kids. I'm like, yeah. You can handle them using these techniques that are really bad for learning and for their brain.
Manage them.
You can manage them. Right. And I'm like, it's not you I'm worried about. Actually, I'm worried about the kids, which is not, I mean, you'd think that a system of education would be really concerned with kids, but it's really, really not at the core. Kids do not have a voice in the education system, and they don't get listened to. They don't get a vote, right? And so adults end up making a lot of decisions that are good for adults. And that's just the way the world is. I don't think that's like ill-intentioned. It just is. But I think every kid in a microschool needs to have a direct connection to an adult that has enough energy and mental resource to like be there for them and to actually communicate that safety, those safety cues to the brain that the brain is looking for to be able to satiate that need so that child can learn. So when we say microschool, we mean 5 to 10 kids. 12, sure. 3.
Okay.
Sure.
So
like
take us
broad,
through, take us through a day in a life then of what a student. So we have 5 to 10 kids. We have a really loving, caring adult who likes kids. And so what else? What happens in a day whenever a student goes to a Prenda Microschool?
Yeah. So Prenda is an organization that helps people start and run amazing microschools. That's like our internal like vision sentence that we all say. We can all repeat that. That's what we're doing, which means that not every microschool is the same, right? So every Prenda microschool is not like a little cookie cutter school. Like you have to get to know that guide specifically. That guide's going to bring a lot of different energy, different focus. But if they're using the Prenda model, I can tell you what that looks like, but you're going to have to talk to every unique individual guide, which is perfect because in a school, you don't really like, if you maybe have a good relationship with the teacher or with the principal, you can kind of like get your kids the teachers you want here and there, depending. But this, like as a parent, you can completely vote with your feet. It's like, oh yeah, like that guide didn't like the vibe, didn't like something else. Like I'm going to go find a different guide. So that creates an educational marketplace where the incentives are lined up for like guides to take care of parents and kids, which is perfect because that's kids we want at the center. Who is the greatest advocate for their child? The parent. So if we create a system that incentivizes like respecting and respecting parents and their choices about their kids and cultivating those relationships so that guide understands that family, and then only asking that guide to do that for 10 families. If nobody's siblings, a lot of time we'll get like little siblings. So you'll really have like 6 parents, you're building relationships with and stuff. So that is a really important piece. I'm on a tangent. Sorry. I only speak in tangents. I'm learning. Everything I say is a tangent.
So the model, tell us the model. Yeah. So when a guide goes through training or goes through and says, okay, I want to run a microschool and I want to use the Prenda model. What are they getting? How are they encouraged to set up the environment? And I mean, we've talked about little things like future self and connection and safety and, flexible environment. But what else? Can we talk about like the actual learning modes? And what does a day look like?
Sure. So it's all based around kind of 3 main principles. Empowerment, maybe 4 principles. The idea of empowerment. So we have Prenda Camp. Camp stands for Community, Autonomy, Mindset, and Purpose. And this is something that they do during a time of the day we call Connect Mode. It's like 15 to 20 minutes in the morning where we all come together. And Prenda provides like journal prompts, discussions, videos, activities, games that help you build culture and it helps kids build the skills of an empowered learner. It helps them understand what autonomy means, what accountability is, how we can manage our thoughts and our emotions and how we're completely responsible for those things. And we're not looking to others to like make us happy or to like not do things that bug us. Is like everything, like I'm fully responsible for myself internally. And we teach kids the skills to manage all of that. This is where we do a lot of that future self work. But that's the culture that we're trying to build. And then the rest of the day is really focused around either mastery or inquiry. And so and mastery and inquiry, it's not like it's mastery time, it's inquiry time, but the learning modes, which I'll talk about in a minute, that like mastery and inquiry is like driven throughout everything that we do. There's also another, if you want to like understand like the pedagogy better, like Prenda is closely aligned with something called constructivism, which is like a Jean Piaget thing. I can like post some, I don't want to go all into that right now. Then you'll know how nerdy I am. I'm like trying to like create this facade of like not that nerdy. But I'm profoundly nerdy about
embrace it, Katie. Just embrace it.
Pedagogy. So mastery. Okay. So we talked about connect mode. The next part of the day is conquer mode. So every kid comes in, they take an adaptive diagnostic test in math and reading. This is not a stressful standardized test like kids are accustomed to. It is actually optional. So if you don't want your kids to take it, just say like, I don't want my kids to take the test. And we'll be like, okay, we'll try to do our best. The goal of this time is to find every child's learning frontier. In standard education speak, that's called their zone of proximal development. This is a concept developed by Lev Vygotsky. And it's the idea, it's like the Goldilocks zone of where you're learning it. Something isn't too easy, but it's not also like I'm on the floor crying too hard, but it's at that challenge level where I have to be engaged. My brain is a little stressed, so I'm focused, but I can do it if I have a little support, right? So we want to find that level for everyone. And that is so wildly different. Like in the traditional classroom, we have 25, 30 kids all learning in the same group, listening to the same lesson out of the teacher's mouth, who can only deliver one lesson at a time, right? And then she's asked to differentiate her education or differentiate her teaching to kids who maybe are a little more advanced or a little bit lower. And so you kind of get these like middle, teach to the middle, and then differentiate for your like high kids and your low kids. And so now we have 3 levels of differentiation, which is really hard to accomplish as a teacher. Very, very, very tricky, very stressful. You have to plan all sorts of different lessons. You have to create groups that rotate. You have to put kids in ability groups where kids now know like, oh, like I'm really smart at math and this other kid is not. It like gives them social fodder for like judgment and comparison. It teaches kids to have limiting beliefs about who they are and what they can accomplish because they're like a slow reader. They have a label now that says like, I'm not good at this. And that's stressful for the brain and inhibits learning in all sorts of kinds of ways that actually stick with you your whole life.
Or you have students like I remember because I was put in the middle group for reading. I, didn't have any support at home or no one was like reading to me at home. And not that they did it on purpose or anything. I just didn't have that. And so where I was learning everything was at school. So I was probably right on track with what I, was exposed to, but I was put in the middle group and I stole my book from school and I took it home. I probably still have it in my dad's attic because I was determined to get to that top group. So then you have students that are like, okay, my worth is if I'm in that top reading group, and then others that just don't care and then they could care, so it really defines who they are at such a young age. I was 6.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. But like from the teacher's perspective, it's like, great, our system is working perfectly. Adrienne is so driven, right?
Yeah.
But she's driven by fear. And then to those kids who aren't driven, it's like, well, I tried once and I didn't get the sticker. This is a game that I can't win that I'm forced to play every day. And so I'm like out, right? And so you have all sorts of different reactions to this setup. But at Prenda, our goal is for every child to spend all of their learning minutes at their learning frontier. So in that differentiated classroom, even if teacher's doing that well, you're only getting a limited number of minutes at your learning frontier, right? You still have to sit through the lesson you don't understand or that you already know. And then you have to wait for the teacher to like dose you with whatever your learning is for the day. And we think that's a big waste of time. And when I say waste of time in the classroom, what I actually hear myself say in my brain is we're wasting their childhood. They could be out playing. They could be they could be doing something else. Like we're just making them sit in this desk. And if they don't show up to that desk, like there are repercussions, parents, like there are truancy laws, like all sorts of things. There's a very strong hand of force here that says you have to sit in the seat. And if we're not making good use of those minutes, like that's on us as a system. We need to answer for that. So at Prenda, the goal is
so what
for
does conquer look like then?
Sure. So you come in, you take the adaptive diagnostic test. We get a level for you in math and in reading. And these are like mastery subjects. And then we match you with a curriculum. There's like a suite of curriculums that you can choose from. If a parent has a curriculum that they like, that the guide is willing to work with, that can also be incorporated. We're not like the Prenda police saying you can only learn from these tools. We do not believe that there's one right tool, like one right, like there's no one size fits all, right? So we want to maintain a flexible system and like us, we want to build a system that assumes the need for flexibility instead of like I used to be a speech language pathologist, so I worked in the special education world. Like, man, the hoops these people have to jump through to get a special accommodation is just crazy. So at Prenda, it's like, yes, you need that accommodation. Great. Like, we can do that. And we can do that for everyone, right? Because we have these small groups that are really focused on individual needs. So that's Conquer. And then they're matched with a curriculum, and then they set a goal and they set a purpose for that goal. So every student has a little dashboard that they see. We call it Progress Mountain. Here's where you're at. Maybe you're 2 years ahead. Maybe you're 3 years behind. We do not care. We are learning where the data says you need to learn. If you try that level and it's like too easy or too hard, we will adjust the level. If you try a tool, a curriculum, and it's like, oh, this is really hard for me to learn this way, this is being explained in a way that makes sense to me, let's switch your tool. Like there's just it's just packed with flexibility and options so that we can accommodate easily for every child's needs. So then they set a long-term goal, and then our software breaks down that long-term goal into daily commitments. And so you come into the classroom or the microschool and you set a daily commitment towards that goal that you have chosen with your parent and with your guide, and that you've set your own internal future self-purpose for. So anytime you're not doing it, the guide's not like, oh, you're going to have to stay in the recess. It's like, oh, what would your future self think? Like, what's your purpose? Like, have you come to disconnected from your purpose? Like, is that not very important for you today? Like, is there some other purpose that is more important today? Like, we're having that kind of a conversation instead of like, hey, you're not going to get your sticker, or I'm going to talk to you in this mean tone and look at you hard so that you feel like, oh, if I want to stay in this adult's good graces, I need to perform and behave, right? So we use different mechanisms in Conquer to help kids really unearth their purpose and define their intrinsic motivation. That being said, like not everyone comes to the Prenda environment ready to learn like that, right? Like you need to have that kind of like wet wood dry out period where it's like, I don't know, I've never thought about what I want to do or what I want my life to be about. And that's going to take me 6 months to kind of start to be able to think about that, right? And so there might be a period of time where you're just like doing math for math's sake. And like there are different ways we meet kids where they're at to help them feel excited and motivated to learn while they're discovering their purpose and their intrinsic motivation. It's not a light switch. It's more like the sun rising. It happens slowly. It happens differently for every kid. So that's Conquer. After Conquer, we move into our inquiry part of the day. We call it collaborate mode, where this is like a whole group experience where we're mostly focused on science and social studies. And we have all sorts of different activities and things, challenges that kids do together that sharpen their problem solving skills, their communication skills, their leadership skills, their team building skills, while they're discovering all of fascinating, truly fascinating, amazing things about history and science. Instead of like, open your book to page 30. Today we're learning about the Renaissance. It's like, no, like all of this has to start with kid questions. Like we teach the guides that the question is the curriculum. And we have a lot of like, I call them on-ramps into learning, where it's like, oh, this thing looks cool. This like picture in Prenda World is interesting to me, and I'm going to choose to explore that. And we're curating all of these resources so they're getting really high quality content. But they're not being sat down and read to like through a textbook, right? It's like this discovery process. We follow the inquiry cycle. You can Google that. We actually have a really great episode on that with Trevor McKenzie, but that's a really, really good deep dive into inquiry. In fact, his book is called Dive into Inquiry, and I love it. I love all of his work. So that's collaborate mode. And then create mode is the last part of our day, where it's all hands-on project-based learning. And this is where that constructivism piece really comes into play, where we're doing real things with our learning. Sometimes I'll go in and I'll read kids' purposes when they set their goals. And I'll see, like, I want to be able to do math so that I can solve math problems. It's like, oh, whoops, that's not a purpose, right? Like that's like a loop. Like we're not just like I, as a functioning member of society, I'm not just sitting at home doing math problems that I created for myself to do. Like that's not part of being human. Solving a problem, a real world problem with math is what we do, why we do math, right? And so you can see this evolution in kids as they set their purpose, be like, oh, I actually want to be able to solve this. I see this problem in the world and I want to be able to help contribute to that problem. And I see that my third grade math will lead me to eventually learning the math that I need to understand like engineering to like be able to go solve that problem in the real world. So we really want to draw them out in that way. And that we start doing that in create mode with hands-on projects. And we help them find a real problem, to do a real thing in their community, to present to an authentic audience, and to make their learning real, relevant, and meaningful to them. So that's the whole shebang. You get connect mode, conquer mode, collaborate mode, create mode. And that's a Prenda day. I did it. I answered your question.
You did it. So what are some of Prenda's weak spots? Like what are some things that Prenda is improving upon?
I love this question because I'm like a total perfectionist. And while there's like this analogy of like, well, we're building the airplane while we're flying it. It's just like, that's a stupid idea. Like no one should ever get on an airplane that's not built. But that's how how these things work. And it's not like we have this kind of perception. It's like, here, take my child. No, don't. So I have this like impulsive, like, we just need to make everything perfect all the time. But like, that's not how things are created in the world. And your public school, like down the street, is also not like that. It's not fully baked. Like they're still figuring things out. They're doing experiments. They're trying to see what works, and things like that. And I think that's good. I think that I want the people that are in charge of education to be leaning into new ideas, to be trying things and to be finding what works instead of being like, well, this is what we've done. This is what we've always done, right? Like the world is changing and we need to change along with it and help prepare kids for a world that like doesn't even exist yet. So like if we're not leading out by saying like, what if we tried this and let's take this new approach? Like, what are we even doing? How are we supposed to raise kids that will do that in 30 years if we're not modeling that to them now? So, I will be the first to tell you that Prenda is not perfect, but I think the intent and like the principles are pretty darn close to perfect. Not that we're not open to more learning, but we've helped open over 1,000 schools and we've had thousands of kids come through the program, which is not to say we've empowered and won the hearts and minds of thousands of kids. It's that we have lots of learning data points like, oh, that didn't work and this did work. And so we have a lot of data and experience to stand on. And so places where Prenda, I think, can improve, just in our like process, what we're asking guides to do is complicated. And I think there's a lot we can do in that like guide development process to really like, we do a lot of work with our guides, but it's not like as open and go as I'd like it to be, right? There's kind of like some friction in that process that I think that Prenda could work on erasing for potential guides to help them better learn what to do and how to do it. I think there are a lot of improvements in our software, and just the depth of our content can improve. And I'm super excited for like the plans we have with Prenda and like all of the different things I see coming together in the next like 2 to 5 years to be like really, really impactful in the education space, doing things very differently than most people do them. And I'm sure there's lots of learnings and exciting twists and turns that we'll go through.
Is the biggest difference is, for example, when my son was at a traditional school and right from the beginning, first day, or when we just met the teacher, she showed me the red, yellow, green behavior chart that she uses in her classroom. I said, please do not use that with my child. He's a green kid. He's going to be stressed out about it. My middle child's a yellow kid and my oldest is a red kid. I already know like what color they are. Please don't use this. And she told me, well, I have to. And so I think the biggest difference with Prenda, what I noticed when my kids were in a microschool is as a parent and honestly as a guide, you have more of a voice. I have seen so many guides have really great ideas and they come to Prenda and guess what? Prenda goes, you know what? we're going to listen to you because this is a really good idea and it's going to impact more people in a school environment where there's all the bureaucracy of school. It's way harder to make change and way harder to take those weak spots and go, okay, this isn't working well. Let's change it. Whereas at Prenda, I feel like there's a lot more, honestly, room for empowerment from the guide standpoint as well as the parent standpoint. And because each guide runs their own microschool and has the autonomy to run it how they want, then they can, really listen to the parents and cultivate an environment that works well for each and every one of their students. Way easier to do because there's only 5 to 10 students than thousands of students under one building.
Yeah, I love that. That's so perfect. So just along with your question, weaknesses, like I think that helping people understand the underlying principles of what we're doing is really important. That's a big focus of the Kindled podcast, right? Because like we can create curriculum, we can create systems and stuff, but until like I see it in the eyes of guides, they're like, okay, I'm doing this stuff, but when they get it, like what they're doing, they become very passionate and very effective advocates for student autonomy, student mastery, student inquiry, all of these things. And that is like really what turns a microschool into like a nice environment for kids to an impactful, empowering environment for kids. And so I think that that's something that I'm really going to be focusing on the next like 2 to 5 years is like helping adults understand the underlying principles even more than we do now. I think we are doing a pretty good job now. I want to do like an amazing, excellent job there. So that would be my other like thing to improve.
Yeah. It makes me think of our very first episode of season 2 with Julia, because she came from teaching, was a teacher in a really, rough school district. And she said, even though she knew how to teach, she could manage all these kids and had all these tools and things. She said, it took some time to get to this place. I can tell you though, you walk into her microschool and it is pure Prenda magic. She is following the model to a T, but then she has autonomy within that to make it her own, because she is just embodies this very like ethereal presence about her that she's able to infuse into her environment, but she is following the model. And you guys, it works. It is just so incredible when you walk into her microschool and see these kids truly being empowered.
Love it.
Okay, so Katie, who is Prenda for and how can they find Prenda? How can they sign up?
Prenda's for everyone, honestly. But for kids, it's for K through 8th kids. Sorry, we don't do high school yet. But as far as becoming a guide, anyone can become a guide. You do not need to have a formal education background. If you love kids, are mildly tech savvy and willing to learn, like we can help you run a microschool. Family wise, this is for parents who want their kids to think for themselves, want their kids to be able to like develop their own personhood and want to put their kids in an environment that is aligned to their family values, because that parent is going to have a really strong voice into the culture of that microschool and working as a partner with that guide. Guide wise, it's for people who want to have an impact with kids. And maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a homeschool parent, maybe you've never thought about doing anything in the education space. Maybe your students that are in public school and they're just not thriving and you want to be a part of that solution. Like any of those, if you're in those categories, like we are built for you. And I that being said, like, I don't think Prenda is the only kind of microschool you can run, right? Like Prenda is one approach to learning. I think there are many really, really valid and beautiful approaches to learning. So if you agree with the idea that kids deserve to love school and that kids enjoy school and thrive more when we give them more choices, like choices within guardrails. If you love the idea of mastery, if you think mastery makes sense instead of like, let's just make sure all the 9-year-olds know about whales by week 3, like, let's get off the kind of like curriculum schedule that's been given to us by people far away. Like our kids can still have all of the right skills. We can do that in a mastery and inquiry focused way. If those ideas make sense to you, like go check out the website, go like read our blog, listen to more Kindled episodes, like find out more about this idea. Prenda.com. You can find all of those things.
Awesome. This was a great deep dive into the Prenda model. And we just learned even more than what it's like in the day in the life. I just love listening to you. I'm like, oh my gosh. We have been doing this podcast for some time and I've been working with you for 4 years and still I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. I'm writing this down. I'm going to put it on my wall. So anyways, thank you for diving into what Prenda is and the change that we are seeking in the world. So that is it for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Kindled podcast. If it was helpful to you, please like, subscribe, and follow us on social at Prenda Learn. If you have a question you would like Katie to address, you just need to email podcast@prenda.com. You can also go to our website and sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Sunday Spark.
The Kindled podcast is brought to you by Prenda. Prenda makes it easy for you to start and run an amazing microschool built on all of the ideas that we talk about here on the Kindled podcast. If you want more information about becoming a Prenda guide, just go to prenda.com. Thanks for listening and remember to keep kindling.